When society collapses, the government doesn't sit idle waiting for order to restore itself. History has proven, time and time again, that governments act fast, decisively, and often ruthlessly to maintain control. If you think your rights, your property, or your resources are safe during a national emergency, you're dangerously mistaken. Understanding what gets seized first isn't conspiracy theory. It's historical fact backed by executive orders, emergency legislation, and documented confiscations that have already happened in modern democracies. If you want to survive what's coming, you need to know exactly what they'll take, when they'll take it, and how to protect yourself before it's too late. Subscribe now, because what I'm about to reveal could mean the difference between being a victim and being prepared when the system finally breaks. Let's cut through the noise and look at what actually happens when governments invoke emergency powers. In the United States alone, there are executive orders dating back decades that grant the federal government sweeping authority to seize private property, control production, ration resources, and even mobilize civilian labor during declared emergencies. Executive Order 10998 allows the government to take over all food resources and farms. Executive Order 1997 grants control over electrical power, petroleum, gas, fuels, and minerals. Executive Order 11,000 permits the mobilization of civilians into work brigades under government supervision. These aren't theoretical documents gathering dust in some archive. They're active legal frameworks waiting to be activated the moment a president declares a national emergency. And here's the terrifying part. A national emergency doesn't require congressional approval. One signature, and these powers go live. Gold was the first thing Franklin D. Roosevelt confiscated in 1933 during the Great Depression. Executive Order 6102 made it illegal for American citizens to own gold coins, gold bullion, or gold certificates. Citizens were forced to turn in their gold to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper money at a fixed rate of $20.67 per troy ounce. Anyone who refused faced 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, equivalent to roughly $200,000 today. After the government collected the gold, they revalued it to $35 per ounce, effectively stealing wealth from every American who complied. This wasn't some authoritarian dictatorship. This was the United States government stripping citizens of their assets under the guise of economic recovery. If they did it once, they can do it again. And today, with digital currency tracking and sophisticated surveillance systems, confiscating assets would be far easier than going door to door in 1933. Food comes next, always. During World War I and World War II, the U.S. government implemented strict food rationing and price controls through the Food Administration and later the Office of Price Administration. Sugar, meat, butter, coffee, canned goods, even shoes were rationed using coupon books. Farmers were told what to grow, how much to grow, and who would receive their harvest. Private food stockpiles beyond a 30-day supply were illegal in some jurisdictions. Hoarding became a criminal offense. People were encouraged to report neighbors who had too much food stored away. The government justified this by saying resources needed to be distributed fairly and directed toward the war effort, but the underlying message was clear. Your food isn't yours during a crisis, it belongs to the state. Fast forward to today, and similar frameworks exist under the Defense Production Act, which allows the president to prioritize and allocate resources, including food, for national defense and emergency preparedness. If grocery store shelves go empty due to supply chain collapse, cyber attack, or conflict, expect immediate government control over food distribution, confiscation of private stockpiles deemed excessive, and criminal penalties for anyone operating outside the official system. Fuel and energy resources get seized almost simultaneously with food. During the 1973 oil crisis, the U.S. government imposed fuel rationing, price controls, and restrictions on gasoline sales. Lines stretched for miles, stations ran dry, and people were limited to purchasing gas only on certain days based on their license plate numbers. The government had the legal authority to seize fuel supplies, control distribution networks, and direct energy resources wherever officials deemed necessary. Today, that authority is even more concentrated. The Department of Energy, under emergency declarations, can commandeer refineries, pipelines, power plants, and fuel depots. If the grid goes down, if oil imports stop, If a major infrastructure attack cripples energy distribution, the government won't hesitate to take control of every gas station, every generator, every backup power supply they can locate. Your personal fuel reserves, your solar panels, your generators, all of it becomes subject to seizure if authorities decide the greater good requires it. And here's what most people don't realize. Local law enforcement, National Guard units, and even FEMA personnel have the authority under state and federal emergency statutes to confiscate fuel and power generation equipment from private citizens during declared emergencies. Firearms and ammunition are always high on the confiscation list, despite constitutional protections. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, New Orleans police and National Guard units went door-to-door confiscating legally owned firearms from law-abiding citizens, leaving them defenseless in a city overrun with looting and violence. The superintendent of police publicly stated that no one would be allowed to have guns, and officers forcibly disarmed residents, often without warrants or legal justification. It took years of lawsuits before courts ruled the confiscations unconstitutional, but by then the damage was done. Gun owners learned a harsh lesson. Constitutional rights mean nothing when armed government agents show up at your door during a declared emergency. States like California, New York, and Connecticut already have red flag laws allowing confiscation without due process based on accusations alone. During a national crisis, those mechanisms expand exponentially. Gun registries, ammunition purchase records, concealed carry permit databases, all of that information becomes a roadmap for confiscation teams. If you think your Second Amendment rights will protect you when society collapses, you're living in a fantasy. Governments disarm populations during emergencies because armed citizens are harder to control, harder to relocate, and harder to ration. Unarmed populations comply. That's the cold, hard logic behind every gun confiscation order in history. Vehicles and transportation assets get commandeered as governments try to control movement and logistics. During both World Wars, the U.S. government requisitioned private vehicles, ships, and railroads for military and civilian transport needs. Factories were forced to halt civilian automobile production and retool for military equipment. Private shipping companies had their fleets seized and redirected. Today, the same authority exists under the Defense Production Act and various emergency statutes. If supply chains collapse and the government needs to move food, medical supplies, or personnel, your truck, your van, your SUV could be legally seized. Emergency Management Assistance Compacts between states already authorize mutual aid, which includes sharing or commandeering transportation resources. FEMA has authority under the Stafford Act to direct transportation assets during presidentially declared disasters. And let's be clear about something. When they take your vehicle, you're not getting it back quickly, if at all. Bureaucratic processes for compensation are slow, documentation gets lost, and by the time you might see payment, inflation has gutted the value of whatever check eventually arrives. Communication infrastructure and technology fall under immediate government control during emergencies. The emergency alert system, which you've seen tested on your phone and television, isn't just for weather warnings. It's a system that allows the federal government to take over all broadcast communications, internet service providers, and even cell phone networks during a national emergency. The Telecommunications Service Priority Program already gives government and emergency services priority access to phone networks, meaning civilian calls get dropped when official communications take precedence. During a true collapse scenario, expect internet blackouts, controlled information flow, censorship of social media, and restricted access to communication tools. Ham radio operators, satellite phone users, and anyone with independent communication capability will come under scrutiny. Licenses can be suspended, equipment confiscated, and operators detained if authorities believe independent communications threaten official messaging or operational security. The government understands that controlling information and communication is as critical as controlling food and fuel. An informed, connected population is harder to manage than an isolated, confused one, dependent on official channels for news and instructions. Medical supplies and pharmaceuticals become state property almost immediately in health emergencies. COVID-19 gave us a preview of this. Federal and state governments seized shipments of PPE, ventilators, and medical equipment from private companies and healthcare facilities, redistributing them based on political priorities rather than actual need. The Defense Production Act was invoked to force companies to manufacture specific medical supplies, dictate who received them, and control pricing. Hospitals were prohibited from purchasing supplies on the open market if those supplies were earmarked for federal distribution. Now imagine a collapse scenario with a pandemic far deadlier than COVID, or a biological attack, or a complete breakdown of pharmaceutical supply chains. Insulin, antibiotics, blood pressure medications, pain relievers, all of it gets rationed and controlled by the government. Private stockpiles beyond what's deemed reasonable for personal use become illegal. Pharmacies operate under strict quotas. Doctors prescribe based on government allocation formulas, not medical necessity. And here's the dark reality. When medications run short, decisions about who receives life-saving drugs and who doesn't become political. Those connected to the system, those who comply, those deemed valuable to recovery efforts, get priority. Everyone else waits, suffers, or dies. Bank accounts, investments, and financial assets are frozen or seized during economic collapse. It's already happened in modern democracies. Cyprus in 2013 imposed a bank levy, confiscating up to 40% of deposits exceeding 100,000 euros to bail out failing banks. Greece restricted ATM withdrawals and imposed capital controls, trapping citizens' money inside a collapsing financial system. Argentina has a history of freezing bank accounts during economic crises, converting dollar deposits to worthless pesos overnight. The United States has mechanisms in place to do exactly the same thing. The Treasury Department and Federal Reserve have authority to freeze accounts, restrict withdrawals, limit cash transactions, and impose capital controls during banking emergencies. The War Powers Act and International Emergency Economic Powers Act grant sweeping authority to seize assets, block transactions, and control financial institutions. If hyperinflation hits, if banks fail, if digital currency replaces cash, and the government decides your account is too large, or you've been flagged for non-compliance, they can lock you out of your own money with a keystroke. Diversifying assets, holding physical precious metals, maintaining cash reserves outside the banking system, these aren't paranoid moves. They're historically proven survival strategies. Real estate and private property rights evaporate under eminent domain powers during emergencies. Governments can and do seize land, buildings, and homes for military use, refugee housing, quarantine facilities, or infrastructure projects deemed necessary for national security. Compensation is often pennies on the dollar, delayed for years, or never paid at all. After Hurricane Katrina, entire neighborhoods were bulldozed by government order. Homes condemned, land seized, residents relocated and never allowed to return. The justification was public safety and redevelopment, but the result was permanent displacement and loss of generational wealth. During a true collapse, expect mass relocation orders, government seizure of rural properties for food production, urban buildings converted to housing for displaced populations, and private land declared off limits for security reasons. If you own a farm with water, livestock, or fertile soil, you're a target. If you have a large home in a strategic location, it becomes government property. If you resist, armed enforcement arrives, and you're removed by force or arrested for non-compliance. Property rights are one of the first casualties of emergency rule because controlling space means controlling people. Labor and workforce mobilization is another tool governments deploy immediately. History is filled with examples. Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression, wartime factory shifts during World War II, mandatory national service in countries like Switzerland and Israel. The United States maintains legal authority under various executive orders and the selective service system to mobilize civilian labor during declared emergencies. This doesn't just mean military conscription. It means forcing civilians into infrastructure repair, agricultural work, medical support, logistics. Whatever the government decides is critical. Refusal to comply results in criminal penalties, loss of benefits, asset seizure, or imprisonment. If the power grid collapses and needs repair, expect engineers, electricians, and technicians compelled into government service. If food production falters, expect urban populations relocated to rural areas and forced into farm labor. If hospitals overflow, expect anyone with medical training, even retired or lapsed licenses, pressed into service whether they volunteer or not. This isn't speculation. The legal frameworks exist right now, waiting for activation. Water rights and access come under government control faster than most people expect. In the western United States, water rights are already heavily regulated, but during drought, contamination events, or infrastructure collapse, governments impose strict rationing, redirect water supplies, and prohibit private use beyond minimal survival needs. Wells can be capped, rainwater collection outlawed or restricted, and private water storage tanks subject to inspection and seizure if deemed excessive. California has already experimented with mandatory water rationing, fines for overuse, and restrictions on agricultural irrigation. Expand that to a national crisis, contaminated municipal water supplies, or infrastructure sabotage, and you'll see immediate government control over every water source. Access to clean water becomes a tool of compliance. Those who follow orders, register for ration cards, cooperate with authorities, they get water. Those who resist, hide resources, or operate outside the system get cut off. Water is life, and controlling it means controlling survival itself. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, understand that legal ownership means nothing during a declared emergency. Governments operate under different rules when martial law or emergency powers are invoked. What's yours today becomes theirs tomorrow, with the stroke of a pen. Second, diversification and decentralization are your best defense. Don't keep all your assets in one place, one form, or one system. Physical goods, skills, relationships, and knowledge can't be frozen, seized, or deactivated like digital assets. Third, stay under the radar. The more visible you are, the bigger target you become. Large stockpiles, obvious preparations, public discussions about what you have, these make you a priority for confiscation teams. Blend in, keep quiet, and operate within trusted networks. Fourth, build resilient systems that don't depend on government infrastructure. Independent water sources, off-grid power, local food production, decentralized communication. These reduce your vulnerability when official systems fail or get weaponized against you. Fifth, know your legal rights and document everything. When confiscations happen, those who fight back through legal channels, who have records, witnesses, and documentation, have the best chance of eventual restitution, even if it takes years. Sixth, develop skills that make you valuable rather than a liability. Governments prioritize people who contribute to recovery efforts. Medical skills, mechanical knowledge, agricultural experience, these make you an asset rather than just another mouth to feed. Most people live in a comfortable delusion that the rule of law protects them, that property rights are sacred, that constitutional guarantees mean something when systems collapse. History screams otherwise. Every modern government, including the United States, has seized private property, suspended rights, and imposed authoritarian control during emergencies. It's not a question of if, but when. And when it happens, those who prepared, who understood the playbook, who took steps to protect themselves before the crisis hit, they're the ones who survive with their freedom and dignity intact. Those who ignored the warnings, who trusted the system, who believed it couldn't happen here, they're the ones standing in line for rations, watching their property seized, wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. If you think this sounds extreme, research Executive Orders 10992 through 11005. Read the Defense Production Act. Study what happened during Katrina, during the Great Depression, during both World Wars. Look at what's happening right now in countries experiencing economic collapse or authoritarian crackdowns. The patterns are identical. The mechanisms are universal. And the United States is not immune, no matter how exceptional we believe ourselves to be. The legal infrastructure for total government control already exists. It's written into law, established through precedent, and ready for activation. The only question is what event triggers it. Economic collapse, pandemic, cyber attack, conflict, or some combination that overwhelms every system simultaneously. Don't just listen to this and forget about it tomorrow. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what's coming. Comment below with your own insights, your own research, your own experiences with government overreach. Like and subscribe because this channel exists to cut through the propaganda and deliver the hard truths most people refuse to face. And if you want to go deeper, you'll find in the pinned comment some guides and documents that can take your preparedness to the next level. Check them out when you're ready because what you learn there could save your life when everything else fails. The collapse isn't some distant hypothetical. It's a historical inevitability that's happened to every civilization that believed it was too advanced, too secure, too powerful to fall. Don't be another victim of ignorance. Prepare now, while you still can.